Alright guys, Murphs here, and today I want to discuss the relationship between barrel length and accuracy pistol edition. Now we've done some barrel length sessions previously, specifically around shotguns and their relation to any advantages found in shotgun barrel length, and if you're interested in that, I'll throw the link in the description. However, today I want to talk about handguns specifically. We're not going to get into rifles except to throw a couple of references that direction. Why handguns? Over the years, I've seen a lot of value espoused to having a slightly longer barrel in a handgun. And it's never made a lot of sense to me for a lot of reasons that we're going to discuss here in a little bit. So I also want to take this opportunity to go ahead and generate some target data to be able to discuss as well, so that we can decide at the end of the day as to whether or not my personal bias in this case, got a fruit fly, if my personal bias in this case actually relates to results of some sort. So with that, why don't we go ahead and get into the two factors that most people talk about whenever it is that they're talking about handgun barrel length. And the first is velocity, and the second is sight radius. And you see this a lot, especially in combat handgunning and all that kind of stuff. And we're going to talk about that quite a bit before this is all said and done. I want to start off with velocity. Now, something I do need to identify about velocity right off the bat here, guys, is that I do not have a chronograph. So I don't really have any in-field data to generate for you. I don't find it terribly interesting in this case. There's a lot of stuff that we can go ahead and talk about projections, because there are so many things that impact velocity: barrel length, projectile type, ammunition type, burn powder or burn rate, all these different action type, all these different types of things are really going to play into a lot. And we're going to spend a lot of time discussing just the velocity side of this. And I really don't even necessarily have data to represent. So we can go ahead and just pull out some contextual data, some expectations, and then extrapolate from there. So first off, when it comes to barrel length, we can generally expect 25 to 50 feet per second increase per inch. Now, if we're talking about rifles going from, say, a 10.3 5.56 to a 20-inch 5.56, that's a significant difference. But some of the things that we have to take into account with this is going to be the amount of powder that's on hand to begin with and the burn rate of said powder. So we have a slower burning powder, it's going to be better able to take advantage of a longer barrel. But if we ever hit a point where there's either too much propellant to be burnt, we have inefficient burn at that point. We have a whole bunch of additional ejecta in the form of unburnt powder coming out and no gain in velocity. And if we have too much barrel and not enough propellant, we hit a point of diminishing return to where we have more friction than we necessarily have pressure pushing the projectile out of the barrel. We might be losing some velocity at that point. There's a very fine line. Now, pistol ammunition, handguns for the most part are not taking full advantage of velocity. That is why we have rifles. We already know that to begin with. Handguns are suboptimal fight stoppers. They are just convenient fight stoppers because they are more likely to be present when the fight starts. If I had my options, I would rather fight with a long gun any day over a handgun. Unfortunately, it's not practical to carry a long gun all day long, but I can carry a handgun quite frequently. So I don't necessarily get out of whack over velocities or mass or energy or any of those types of things, as much as I'm more concerned about penetration and expansion of the actual projectile. Now, once upon a time, you would say that I need every little bit of velocity because it's the 1990s, it's the 1980s, it's the 1970s, it's whenever, and I don't have good bullet technology. So I need to have the most velocity in order to be able to ensure that my hollow points are going to expand, or I'm going to have to use a heavier grain solid projectile in order to be able to get the penetration that I need to be able to reach organs that are vital. However it is that you want to break that down at that point. The reality is today, with our ability to be able to bond jackets to cores and also generate high velocities out of short barrels, ammunition is not the limiting factor. Just handguns themselves are the limiting factor. The fact that they are a conscious trade-off between size and portability, between energy and downrange effect and portability. Portability being the key thing here. The gun that you have is more important than the gun that you don't when the fight comes. So with that, whenever we're talking about, well, I've got a longer barrel than this gun over here, so I have more velocity, which equals more energy. Now, if you're talking about the difference between a Glock 19 and a Glock 17, you're talking about a 3.75 inch barrel versus a 4.25 inch barrel. 0.5 inches, 12 to 25 feet per second, not going to save the day here. Not at all. 10 inches and shooting out to 500 yards, That's going to make a big difference in a rifle cartridge, but not so much in a handgun cartridge. Now, what comes after that is, well, the advantage of higher velocities and stuff like that is that I'll have less drop over distance, which means that I'll have to make less correction in order to be able to hit targets that are further away. And while that's accurate, again, that's more of a rifle consideration. That is less of a handgun consideration. Most of your self-defense type situations are going to occur between 3 and 7 yards, and a whole lot of drop to account for in those distances. If you're talking about pistol qualifications, a lot of them go out to about 25 yards. Again, not a lot of drop to account for at those distances. A lot of manuals will tell you that the max effective range of a pistol is 50 yards. You might maybe have a little bit of drop, but that's a pretty long shot. And the furthest shot I've ever made with a handgun was 100 yards. At that point, that is less about effectiveness or fighting and more about skill. Now, if all you had was a handgun and a threat 100 yards away, is it confidence inspiring to know that you could make a hit? Well, yeah, absolutely. But you're now pushing an already suboptimal performer to beyond the extent of its capability. So sure, you're putting hits on target, and they're better than no hits at all. But maybe you would be better served either disengaging or working your way in closer in order to be able to put more and more effective hits on the opponent. Just something to think about overall. All right, so that's the velocity side of this discussion. Why don't we go ahead and start talking about sight radius? A lot of people will tell you that, well, a longer barrel is going to give you greater sight radius. Well, okay, why does that matter? And a lot of it comes down to what it is that you're trying to do. So one of what I consider to be altruisms in fighting type handguns, we'll talk about that here for a second. Actually, for quite a bit, because that's what I'm primarily interested in. In fighting handguns, ideal sights to me are prominent. They have some airiness in the rear sight so that I can more quickly pick up a large front sight and be able to put hits on target. I'm not worried about I'm still trying to make really nice groups wherever it is that I'm hitting. I'm still trying to hit the intended target, but I'm also prioritizing being able to quickly pick up my sight picture so that I can engage that target instead of trying to find a very compact, nice, neat sight picture. Whereas with target guns, you might be more interested in a very narrow sight profile, a very thin front sight blade, and a very narrow aperture in the rear so that you can make this nice, neat little sight picture and be able to line it up on your target and be able to shoot nice, neat little groups. That is something that could be advantageous with sight radius. But you can see where the difference is. Now, of course, ideal pistol sights would be some combination of the two. Perhaps a fairly tight profile, but with a lot of contrast or something along those lines so that you can pick them up more vibrantly and be able to engage targets more effectively that way. However it is that you go, presentation is going to play a huge part in this as well. It's a whole separate conversation. So, the closer I move something to my eye, the larger it will appear. If I was standing in front of the Empire State Building and I put my thumb right in front of my eye and squinted the other, I wouldn't be able to see the Empire State Building. Does that mean that my thumb is bigger than the Empire State Building? From a point of view, in this case, yes. However, the further I move my thumb out, the less of a larger object it will cover. It's the same type of overall idea in sights. My front sight can seem quite large if it's on a short barrel, but if I put it at the end of a long barrel, it'll seem much smaller and be less obstructive of the target. I'll be able to better pick out small portions of the target to be able to aim at, the kind of aim small, miss small thing. You need small reference points in order to be able to aim at your small target. If you have, an absolute tombstone of a front sight that covers up that target, it's going to be difficult to not only read impacts, but also have a repeatable point of aim. Those are the kind of things that you have to take into account. Now, for today's discussion, I brought back 2 revolvers previously reviewed on the channel. And that would be this Heritage Roughrider chambered in 22 long rifle with a 4 3/4 inch barrel, as well as this Heritage Roughrider chambered in 22 LR with a 9-inch barrel. So I thought this would be a really great opportunity to be able to take a barrel, almost double it in length, and see how big of an impact we had on accuracy. Now, a couple of caveats before we get into this. I had a couple of small issues with this gun specifically where I noticed that cartridge casings kept backing out, which was causing the action to gum up a little bit. I was fairly certain that I was seeing them flush against the chambers. However, that can sometimes be an issue with especially rimfire revolvers. But I also noticed a lot of unburnt powder, so I wondered if the issue might have been the ammunition overall, if I was having some inefficiencies in the burn on that ammunition. That would be American Eagle 38 grain hollow point copper plated ammunition. All right, but regardless, I tested both of these guns with the same box of ammunition, so our results should be pretty on par, or at least consistent. Now, also keep in mind, guys, I shot these kind of rapidly, maybe a little bit more rapidly than somebody who's trying to shoot for accuracy should have been shooting, but they were shot at equal pace, so I don't think it's going to be that big of an issue, if I'm being completely honest. All right, so with that, why don't we go ahead and discuss how it is that I did the testing. I went to an indoor range where the furthest I could shoot was 10 meters. Now, would this have been more ideally done if I'd taken this out to a pistol range that had more distance, maybe up to 25, maybe even further? Perhaps, but I feel that grounding it in the more practical sense of combat pistol marksmanship would be a better starting point. If there's enough interest in this video, perhaps at some point in the future, we'll take them out to a longer distance and see what it is that we can pull out of it. But the distances that I shot at were 2 meters, 4 meters, 6 meters, and 10 meters. Starting off with the 4 3/4 inch barrel, this was the grouping that I shot at 2 meters. There, I can cover most of that with my thumb pretty effectively. That's not a bad group overall. How did the 9-inch gun fail? Fair. Well, as we can see here, I did manage to shank 1 round low, which was entirely me. That trigger is a little bit lighter in the 9-inch gun than it is in the 4 3/4 inch gun. So, yes, I wound up pulling that particular round. But if we look at the cluster of 4 up above it, that's a pretty tight grouping. And honestly, even with the round that I shanked, it's not that far off of the first grouping. Okay, well, you know what? Shanked rounds happen. There's only so much that you can do about it. What about 4 meters? How did they perform? Now, something else that I'll tell you, that it was a little bit faster on the sights with this handgun at 2 meters than it was with this handgun. And of course, that is because that my front sight is much further out in front, and we are talking about gutter rear sights. So there's not a whole, and there's no contrast between the front and rear sight on these handguns. So with that being a little bit further out in front, it can be a little bit difficult to pick up that front sight sometimes. That's just a reality of blacked out sights on handguns, especially when they're this small. All right, I shot next at 4 meters. You can see here we have 4 in the red yet again, and 1 round kind of pulled off to the right there. Not too bad of grouping with the 4 3/4 inch gun. What about with the 9-inch gun? Well, again, I shanked around, and then I have this cluster of 4 up here. So if we go entirely based off of the cluster of 4, I would say the 2 groupings are pretty comparable overall. But of course, we have to talk about the group that we actually have. So this gun shot a much wider group at 4 meters than the 4 3/4 inch gun did at the same distance. Now, one thing that you will note that I noticed with this handgun is that it does recoil less with all that barrel out in front, but it didn't necessarily help all that much in the accuracy department as much as it kept me on target longer, I guess. All right, going next to 6 meters. We see the 4 3/4 turning in a pretty consistent group from 4 meters, maybe a little bit larger. I'd say pretty on par with the one at 4 meters. I'd say that we had pretty consistent result, and of course one kind of flying out there a little bit. I will say, yeah, those are overall pretty much the same size group at 6 meters. How did the 9-inch fare? Fare. Here, I actually had an interesting result. You can see this upper one is a tear in the paper. It almost looks like the round came through more like sideways. I'm very confused by that. That, to me, looks like an ammunition issue, perhaps. But that was the only time that it happened, so I don't really know how it is that this occurred. I'm very curious as to how this happened, but this is an absolutely abysmal group at 6 meters. Which maybe this was the shooter in this case. We probably pretty solidly say it's the shooter in this case, but this is the gun that we had to do it with regardless, and I shot a not too bad, I shot a much better grouping with the 4 3/4 inch gun than I did with the 9-inch gun. So this makes me start to wonder if perhaps having this fine sight at these more combat related distances was just not that much of an advantage to me, which I would not have expected going in. Now, if I was trying to do a lot of speed drills, yes, I would expect this to be more of an issue, but maybe it was just too fine of a bead on too large of a target. I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that result. But going out to 10 meters, this is the grouping we shot with the 4, and I shot with the 4 3/4 inch barrel. So we can see that is quite large. That is a massive increase from the 6 meter target. So here we can maybe start to see that perhaps I'm losing some manner of perception with the front sight in relation to this target, to where the front sight's becoming far too large and it's covering too much of the target to be able to create nice groupings. How did the 9-inch look at the same distance? Well, the 9-inch barrel gave me pretty comparable results to what we saw at 4 meters. This is actually a little bit tighter than what we saw at 4 meters. So perhaps at 10 meters is where we start to see the trade-off between these two pistols. 10 meters, it starts to fall apart for the 4 3/4 inch barrel, but it starts to come together for the 9-inch barrel. Now, unfortunately, I did not have the ability to be able to shoot any further than that. So once again, if we have more interest, then we will push the distances out a little bit further. So in this case, what are my opinions when it comes to the results between these two handguns? Does barrel length matter? Well, at that point, we've already hit 10 meters, and we're kind of getting out of the average engagement distance when we're talking about combat handguns. Do I think barrel length matters all that much in combat handguns? In a matter of accuracy or velocity, absolutely not. When it comes to portability, I do think barrel length matters. If you're talking about something that you need to carry inside the waistband, a Glock 17L may not necessarily be the best choice. Whereas if you're talking about a duty pistol, you can manage carrying a larger handgun as long as it's not too heavy on your hip, as long as it's not weighing down your belt, whatever type of belt it is you're using, police duty belt, military battle belt, whatever it is that you have going on. That's all that you have to take into account there. If you've maybe got a thinner belt with no type of support system to go along with it, a heavier, longer handgun may weigh more heavily on the belt and make it uncomfortable for all-day carry. Throw some suspenders in there, it might fix that overall. So those are just things that you have to take into account with this. Now, if we were talking about bullseye target matches, shooting at 25 yards and possibly beyond, or really getting into handgun hunting of some sort, I would say a longer barrel has several advantages. One being a little bit finer sight picture, and then two, also having that weight out front in order to balance out recoil so you can have better follow-up shots. And that's especially if you're doing bullseye target type shooting. Now, if you incorporate optics into this discussion, all bets are off, because now that completely changes your association with your aiming reticle. You could have some light magnification that's going to change your ability to be able to shoot well, but also be able to shoot more rapidly close up. That's something else you have to take into account with magnification. As well as if you have a dot or something like that, it gives you a more clear aiming point. Even though a lot of times people think about dots as being like close range options, having a singular focal point to aim with is its own type of advantage. And that's why I feel completely fine with pushing dots out to 400 yards as long as I can actually identify the target. Alright guys, I think that pretty much covers my thoughts on this particular subject. I hope you guys found this content interesting, and that's pretty much what I got. Have a good day.